All right. Okay. Hello, Dara,
Hello.
and welcome back. Uh,
Thank you.
so, guys, I think for this one, the best advice is to buckle up because this is going to be an information dense podcast. Dara and I have been trying to look at the Epstein files in a sort of a different way, avoiding the temptation to look at them as a series of isolated incidents and more as a system. A system that united the most powerful men in the world across the world, spanning industries like the media, where we see names like Rupert Murdoch, the banking and financing system, where we see the most powerful names like Rothschild, the royal family, and multiple US presidents, and of course, prime ministers of Israel, and also intelligence networks. What connects all of the most powerful men in the world into a web like Epstein's? And it goes deeper than pedophilia. So we are going to look at it. We're going to zoom out and we're going to ask some questions so that we can kind of arrive at a place where we understand who was involved, why were they involved, and how did they achieve what they achieved? And really, and most importantly, how is it connected to what's happening in the world today? And what we need to do to, I suppose, bring these people to account, because the system isn't going to hold itself accountable. There's a lot of conversation around the world now about how is nothing happening? How have they not? How has no one been punished? And it's clear that the reason is because these are the people who run the systems that control the world. So a good place to start with this is the root. And it actually goes back to before Epstein. Epstein inherited this system. He definitely grew it. He definitely brought it to new levels of depravity, but he didn't invent it. So, Dara, you have been doing some extraordinary work on that. And I just want to acknowledge that because I think people can look forward to so much insight into the biggest questions about the Epstein files. And I think once we make those links and connect the dots and understand the patterns, it's a very empowering place to be, you know? So I'd advise people listening, maybe take out a notebook, maybe get yourself a cup of coffee and yeah, really take heed. So Dara, will we start at the origins, the root? Point A.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I think that's a great introduction and important to, I guess, position this in terms of it being a system and not necessarily just the bad morals of specific people, because that's not what it is. And the more you look into this, like I have been down such a wormhole over this period, and the deeper you go, in some ways, the more you realize you don't know. But
Mm-hmm.
at a certain point, things all start to loop back into this sort of core network. And there's a thread running through this network from really the Prohibition era in North America. So basically, and I don't think this is the origin, by the way. But this,
Mm.
I think, just for the sake of our analysis for now, it's the best place to start the thread to Epstein and today.
Yep.
So, what uh, has really been happening since Prohibition uh, is this really heavy link between organized crime, intelligence, and state power.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what really happened, and the sort of start of this specific network, a good place to start is in this program called Operation Underworld. And this
Yes.
was a program where the US government, during the Second World War, they collaborated with criminal organizations in the US to serve their interests.
Hmm.
So the two primary groups that are named on the Wikipedia, even of this Operation Underworld, there's an Italian American mafia, and then
Hmm.
there's organized Jewish crime networks, are the
Hmm.
two that are named in Operation Underworld as really the most significant. So they played sort of specific roles in Operation Underworld, and especially through these mafia leaders, specifically Mayor Lansky and another person called Luciano, who was also running an illegal prostitution ring in the 30s, yet was still working with the US government during World War II. So they then basically build these connections with these two incredibly rich liquor dealers that got very rich during Prohibition, and their names are Bronfman and
Hmm.
Rosensteel. Okay,
Hmm.
so Bronfman, there's been a direct thread from Bronfman, even that carries through to today, as part of what is an incredibly influential group of Jewish billionaires called Mega Group.
The
And
mega group.
this is
And
on
Steven
Wikipedia.
Spielberg is one such name involved in this group. And this group, they're responsible for example, the establishment of birthright tours to Israel. So you
Yes.
can connect Brofman in this Prohibition era selling alcohol to
Mhm.
this group called the Mega Group, which established the birthright tours amongst lots of other things they got up to promote Israel and
Yeah.
Israeli and lobby for Israeli interests in the US. Okay, that's really interesting.
Yeah. So there's two Bronfmans in that are named even on the Wikipedia page of 11 members. There's more than that, but just that are named even on the Wikipedia, there's two Bronfmans
Okay.
alongside, for example, Wexner, who was one of Epstein's sort of primary funders in the 80s,
Funders.
who put
Yeah.
Epstein up in his mansion, etc. And then
So
another
Wexner was
person
the
who's very
person who owned the huge mansion in New York where these crimes happened. These
Yeah, so
horrendous crimes.
he's
Yeah.
the basically founder CEO of Victoria's Secret, and that also highlights some links between sort of the trafficking
Trafficking.
with sort of billionaire interests. So he put Epstein on his payroll probably from about the mid 80s and put him up in his mansion. And I think maybe it's best to come back to him a little bit later.
Yeah.
But it's basically kind of the most influential people because he was the supposed founder of this mega group.
Mhm.
And
Along with Bronfman, who is a
with the
descendant of
Bronfmans, there's
the
two of
Prohibition
them.
era Bronfman.
Exactly. So there's
Yeah.
two Bronfmans in there, and significantly somebody else called Lauder, Lauder.
Lauder. So Estee Lauder is
Lauder.
how I would say it.
Estee Lauder.
The
So he
cosmetics
is
company.
from
Yeah.
this family, the Estee
Yeah.
Lauder family.
Yeah.
So I think it's good to circle back to them later, but just to kind of point out this continuum at this point now.
Yes.
So with Bronfman and Rosensteel, so they were kind of basically these two billionaires, if I'm not mistaken. They are Canadian uh, billionaires who start to become very close to lots of very prominent people in New York. But
Hmm.
due to their very close collaborations with the US government in this period during Operation Underworld, they basically were part of the formation of the CIA. They were extremely close with the founder of the FBI, a man called Hoover.
Hmm.
He basically founded the FBI in 1935. And as far back as the 50s, they had him in a basically a sex blackmail ring. In the
Okay.
50s, he was under their control, more or less, but not only under their control, but they seem to actually be very close friends. So, just to clear up a kind of misconception, maybe in that these people are just being outright blackmailed by the people running these sex rings. Yes, that is part of it, but they are also benefiting hugely from being in this sort of circle of trust, you could call it, because they all have stuff on each other, is sort of
Exactly.
the
So
idea.
this is key to it that people are trying to figure out. The blackmail was mutual, and the kind of the recorded participation in acts of absolute and utter depravity was served as almost like a trust pact for these really rotten individuals who made their business in organized crime.
Yeah. So from the start of the FBI and from the CIA, these people are involved.
These
So
are sorry, I'll just repeat again, just to refresh people's memory. These are the Prohibition era Bronfman and Rosenthal who are making their money illicitly selling alcohol. Yeah.
yeah. So, what was this sort of organized crime network doing for the US government in this period? So, different things. So, the Italian American one, they even took part in, they provided intelligence for basically operations that were happening in Sicily because their interests were being threatened by Mussolini during World War II, because he
Hmm.
was driving mafia out of specific parts of Italy, Sicily in particular. And then the groups, so the Jewish organized crime network, as well as the Italian American mafia, were also being used to break up strikes in this period. So any labor strikes, for example, they would go in and break them up. They would also collect a huge amount of intelligence for the US government and
So
officials, and they
I
were
just want to,
working. Uh-huh.
sorry, Dara, just before you move on, I just want to pause there. So their function, you can see from the origins, are to break up people power.
Yeah.
Okay, so their focus is on that. It's yeah, and that's important, and how they're serving the interests of people who don't want people to have that much power. So okay, squashing
Yeah.
strikes. Yeah, continue.
So basically, what else was happening in this period? So the Rosenstiel and Bronfman, they were also at this period funding the Haganah group in Palestine
The terrorist
and
group. Mm-hmm.
terrorist group that was really responsible for the Nakba.
Mm-hmm.
So their intelligence work that they were doing with the US government at this period then also was a precursor not only to the CIA and the FBI, but also to Mossad. And basically, what does that mean for this network is that from the start, really, what are they? They are Zionist,
Mm-hmm.
they are capitalist, and
Mm-hmm.
very importantly, they are criminal.
Yeah. So we have three C's there just for, yeah, that's really good. Criminal,
So
capitalist. Oh
within
no,
with
and Zionist. This is it.
yeah, so within this, and something I think that gets in the way of our analysis a lot of the time, I was even thinking back to this Noam Chomsky book, How the World Works, and it's
Mm.
it's actually a very good book, and it explains a lot. But what does it leave out? This element of crime, you
And
know?
Noam Chomsky, I suppose, lauded authority of critical thinking in terms of the media manipulation and how the powerful
Mhm.
manufacture our consent is
Yeah.
right in here in this
He's
club.
everywhere. He's
Is
everywhere.
in this
He seemed to
club.
be Epstein's best friend.
It's
It's
insane.
that
And
close.
all people, I suppose, who would identify, on the left would have considered him a hero. And it just goes to show the level of deception.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically as this network advances, so in the 50s then is really so through Rosenstiel, and we know this because Rosenstiel's ex-wife, a woman, Kaufman is her name. She was a whistleblower and gave testimony that was corroborated by witnesses. And decades later, she swore under oath, gave testimony, and it was accepted that they began this sex blackmail ring in the 50s. And the most prominent person was this FBI founder and director, Hoover, who
Hoover.
basically was the FBI. He was
Mhm.
their director, I think, for 40 years. And it was widely known that he was engaged in these illegal sexual activities in the 50s, and nothing was ever done about it. And this also goes to show, in terms of when we're trying to understand impunity,
Mhm.
why are they able to do all of this with such impunity? Is from the start, they've controlled the mechanisms that are in place to provide accountability, but
Yes,
they control them from the start.
yes, yeah.
So
They have it well planned, so that they're beyond being caught and held to
yeah.
account. Hmm.
And so basically within this period then, so the sort of precursor to Jeffrey Epstein, and who Jeffrey Epstein really replaced, was
Yes.
a man called Roy Cohn.
Now, this is a big name. Just Roy
So
Cohn is
so
is kind of a vital piece of this.
Yeah, so Roy Cohn, I drew out a sort of map, trying to map all of these people together to see how they all linked together.
Yeah,
And
it's amazing.
more central than Epstein and more central than anyone in this map actually turned out to be this person, Roy Cohn.
More central than Epstein, imagine. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
he really like created the network that Epstein just stepped
Inherited.
in. And there
Yeah.
was a pretty much direct replacement. So Roy Cohn actually died due to complications around his AIDS. And basically, he died in 1986. He'd been sick for a couple of years prior. Ironically, he was one of Reagan's closest associates, who is infamous for how he responded to the AIDS crisis.
Mm.
And one of the turning points in how the Reagan government actually treated AIDS was because of Roy Cohn's diagnosis. But he died in 1986, and Epstein is believed to have sort of entered this network officially. Now, he'd already been doing a lot before this, but he comes on to Wexner's payroll in about 1985. So
In
this seems like an
1985.
almost direct
Wexner, who is the
substitution.
co-founder of this mega group, this Jewish interest mega group. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, he comes onto
Victoria's
his
Secret
payroll.
CEO.
Victoria's Secret CEO.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, Cohn, during the 50s, the sort of McCarthy investigations were rife, and they were extremely prominent in terms of just prosecuting anyone with sort of leftist sympathies.
Yeah.
So Cohn also, he was the leader of the Jewish Anti-Communist League. And
Anti-Communist League. It's pretty explicit, isn't it? What he stands
pretty
for.
pretty
Okay.
explicit, and he's referred to as Rosensteel's field commander.
Okay. And Rosenthal was the guy who was squashing people's strikes in Italy.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
or no, the strikes, they were trying to break the strikes in the US.
Oh,
They
sorry,
were
in the
trying to break the
US.
labor strikes
Okay.
during the
Yeah.
US in case they threatened the war effort, and also as just general thugs hired by US companies.
Hmm.
This practice continues today.
Yeah.
So basically, with Cohen, he starts to build up really close relationships with everybody in the whole establishment.
Mm.
Um, so Cohen, he counts Trump as one of his closest friends and his client. And he is connected really to just everybody.
Murdoch, there's a link there. You know that dinner we were talking about, Dara? There was a testimonial dinner in recognition of Cohen and his achievements
Yeah,
in the 80s. And the guest list to that is pretty telling. The whole
yeah,
point, it's run in, there's another group, I can't remember the name of the group that organized it, in conjunction with Israel Bonds.
yeah,
And the whole premise is to recognize him for what he's done in defense of the Israeli economy. And, it uses this language about the beleaguered country of Israel,
yeah,
and how, support for Cohen and this meeting was like a commitment to Israel, is what
yeah.
it translated to. And you look at the guest list, and then you see Trump and you see Rupert Murdoch, and yeah, quite a lot of other names. that we
Yeah, so
recognize to this day.
this event is really like such a revealing list of names for who's in this club.
Mm,
So this is basically, I'm going to probably pronounce this wrong, but it's
yeah,
B'nai B'rith Banking and Finance
that was the
Lodge.
name.
And
Okay,
it's
in conjunction with
basically
Israel
for the
bonds.
sale of
Mhm.
Israeli bonds.
Yeah.
And it's a testimonial dinner in honor of Roy Cohn. So basically, with Roy Cohn, this dinner, if you look at who the honorary chairmen are, one is Rupert Murdoch, another one is Donald Trump, another
Hmm.
one is a man called Alan Greenberg. And Alan Greenberg was the man responsible for bringing Epstein into Bear Stearns. Despite him not having a college degree, despite him actually being a teacher at this point in a Manhattan school, he, for some reason, gets brought into Bear Stearns by this incredibly powerful man called Alan Greenberg. These people
Hmm.
are all listed here as honorary chairmen. And on the tribute committee, again, is this guy Lauder,
Yeah.
who's attending as well. So you see from this list, you can look it
The
up, and
club
it
was
really
already
reveals a lot.
established. The club was already established at this point
Yeah,
when Cohen is working, and he's working on the, I suppose, developing this club, and they're looking out for recruits all the time, I guess.
yeah,
And their recruitment system is, as we know, extremely depraved, and it centers on human trafficking and abuse.
yeah. So this basically system of systematic sexual blackmail, typically involving pedophilia, boys and girls at this point. And most of this was run out of the Plaza Hotel. Subsequently, after Roy Cohn dies in 1986, Trump buys this hotel and rumoredly continues to run parties out of the same room.
No way. So
Two,
before it
two,
was Epstein
288.
Island,
It's like
it was the
Suite
club.
288. It's famous Suite 288 in the Plaza Central Hotel, I
So
believe.
before we had Epstein Island, we had Suite 288 in the Plaza. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah. So that was one of the sites, and basically what happened was there would be bugs, microphones everywhere. There would be double-sided mirrors, and this was again open collaboration, really, between organized crime and intelligence agencies. And again, just to emphasize that these things are almost the same. You know,
Yeah.
they just have
Yeah.
different layers of legitimacy, but almost the same from the start. So
Hmm.
Cohen starts building out this network and starts getting access to a lot of really the most powerful people and making these introductions from one to the
Mm.
other to build up really their collective power.
Yeah.
So with Cohen, so some of really his closest allies, Trump, Dershowitz, Walters Buckley, all who become some of Epstein's closest associates once he sort of takes over the ring.
And Dershowitz
Also,
is, we like, just for people, they'll know who he is. He is a prominent lawyer. He defended Harvey Weinstein. He's a fucking Piers Morgan regular and the staunchest defender of the Israeli state that you could find.
and he's admitted
Mm.
to work for an Israeli intelligence as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Um,
So
right.
again, you see, like from the start, US and Israeli intelligence
Are the
extremely
one.
interlinked and at
Mm.
times seemingly the same.
Yeah. Um, Now that we've, I suppose, had a good idea of the origin, right, and how it connects to Epstein and how Cohen was essentially, he preceded him and he passed on the torch. Ugh. Um, During Cohen's tenure, if we can kind of make it tangible about, I don't want to say the word achievement, but in what way can we connect major political events or financial deals to the operations that were happening under Cohen? Because that's what's happening externally to these networks and these alliances that are being built.
Yeah.
These guys are using state apparatus and a veneer of legitimacy to manipulate and control world events while simultaneously managing the narrative for the public through the likes of Rupert Murdoch. So
Yeah.
Cohen's period is, I suppose, what are we talking? Are we talking the 70s and the 80s?
From the 50s to the
From the
80s.
50s. Oh, okay. He's, because what age is he in the 80s when he dies? He's older. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So can we connect him and his network to these, yeah,
Yeah.
files? Yeah.
Yeah. So in ways I never thought to that I never thought were possible or it could be reality. Honestly, when I was going back through all of this stuff, um, the perhaps the most important factor in politics in the last maybe you could say uh 50 years has probably been this network.
Yes.
Um,
Wow.
Arguably. And I say this, I mean, I've been teaching politics for years, lecturing, and you try to allow students to be able to critically analyze reality in some way and to understand the system, how it operates, and help them to understand their agency and how to maybe affect this system for positive change.
Hmm.
And when it comes to economics or politics, the fact it's a living complex system makes it very difficult to predict. Um, you can go off of different things, specifically material interests are the best way to do so.
Hmm.
Um, but the level of concentration of power that this
Yes.
network reveals, it
Hmm.
skews any sort of natural analysis, and you realize, for me, kind of the most shocking thing was perhaps that as far back as Reagan's first term, they had put him into power from Reagan to George Bush Sr. to Clinton, George Bush Jr.
So these are people who were groomed for power. It wasn't that they got into power and then were blackmailed. It's the reverse order.
Yeah, and that's another misconception I think people have when trying to analyze what these files mean is that sometimes people assume, well, like they got to everyone, that everyone must be a pedophile.
Yeah.
But no, in fact, what typically happens is you show some sort of promise, right? You see, you appear to be a potential future leader,
Hmm.
of something. It could be in politics, it could be in business, it could be in media. Um, so what happens? You then get brought into this ring, and what likely happens is it's done so in a sort of gradual process. And you maybe get invited to a party. What's happening at the parties, again, as far back as, Cohn and these other people, they start offering you cocaine. They start offering you drugs. Then they start bringing out, young girls, boys, depending on what they think you're likely to be into.
Yeah.
And they then sort of get evidence on you doing something illegal that they can then use against you for blackmail.
Hmm.
And if you don't go along with it, you probably just don't end up in power. If
Yeah.
you go along with it, you get paradoxically rewarded and blackmailed at the same time.
Mm. And you're
And
you're a kind of a you're willing to be blackmailed, your willingness to be blackmailed and to enter into this trust pact. But I just want to say something and connect it to the system of capitalism. This is a kind of a ring that has revealed itself to be capitalism functioning at, I'm going to say, the highest level, even though I don't want it to sound positive, but at its most extremely successful level, because these are the
mm,
wealthiest and most powerful men in the world.
mhm,
And the initiation into this club requires a demonstration of pretty anti-life and certainly like deeply depraved acts where you have to
Mm.
demonstrate that essentially you're willing to commit the most evil and worst acts to get into this club.
Yeah. Yeah. And with this, so like another thing, I mean, in terms of doing this research, like you can't look at the world the same way. And that in terms of understanding power, but also just the evilness of it and just
Mm.
like the horrific nature of so much of it and the countless victims of it. And we don't know even the tip of the iceberg around the victims. We
No,
have
we don't.
no idea. We have no idea.
Mm. Mm.
And what do we have is like reports of cannibalism, of babies being dismembered, of these people eating children, and who knows what else is happening in this that we don't know about because that part of these files have not been released. And in fact, we also have to question the release of these files because we're still only reading what they want us to read. They're showing
Mm.
us something. What do we know is that it's designed to lead us in a wrong direction in some way. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do we know is that they redacted every name that could lead to an arrest. Whose names did they not redact? Victims.
Yeah.
And within this, so in terms of say the system of capitalism and what that requires is uh, kind of two things. The first of which is a class solidarity from the most powerful people so that they can essentially all work together and trust each other despite only being out for themselves. Yeah. So within this, then they need something that binds them. And interestingly enough, there's many theories that would even say that this was sort of the purpose of like monotheistic religions to start with, was basically a way to unite sort of separate tribes under a common understanding. And Blind Boy actually did a good podcast on the Epstein Files already, and he gave a good analysis of this sort of thing that even still happens in the elite colleges, even if you think of David Cameron
Oh
with
yes,
big,
there's sickos.
and they do this basically as a way of forming a circle of trust so that they all have dirt on each other, meaning that if one of them releases something, they will also be immediately implicated as well.
And this is Boris Johnson, and this is David Cameron, and this are these oh yuppies. Yeah.
Mhm.
And they had to, like, that famous story about David Cameron and the pig. Or one thing that a blind boy actually said, I listened to that podcast, it was brilliant. They'd go into restaurants and they would absolutely trash the place.
Mhm.
And they would then go up to the management or the wait staff and they'd be like, don't bother calling the police, we control them. And they would throw money at them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so these are the characters that run the countries.
Yeah. And then in terms of like, as you kind of connect it to capitalism, as well, and something that I couldn't sort of help but think when I saw, because there's, even these emails, even about George Bush Sr. and like raping people on boats, and this is in the same thread as babies being dismembered, and then there's the sort of ritual sacrifice and cannibalism happening, and it's like when you look at the structure and you look at the behavior, like what is like sucking the lifeblood out of a dead child other than parasitism.
Yeah.
And actually, it's a representative of the system as the whole, where you have a system of parasitism, where essentially the lifeblood and wealth of the earth is literally being leached by this network of just powerful and disgusting people in equal measure, you know?
And they get a high off of feeding, literally feeding off the most vulnerable. And they think that they sit at the top of this supreme are on this supreme level where, we hear all kinds of language of supremacy. Um, and even one where Epstein says, how do we get rid of the world's poor population? Like discard them. And these are also the people, the governments, and the leaders involved in the world's first live stream genocide, where we have all watched children, babies, mostly children and babies, be absolutely blown to pieces. So this is what they're doing out in the open. And on
Yeah.
the other hand, behind the scenes, they're doing worse.
Yeah.
They're doing worse.
Yeah. The genocide, it starts to make a lot more sense when you apply this lens to it
Yeah,
in
like
terms
the
of
questions
impunity
that
and
we
strategy.
the questions people keep asking, why is nothing happening? Why is no one doing anything? It's almost, there's lots of different ways to look at it, but the release of them now, the partial release, keeps the system intact because it gives just enough to absolutely horrify everyone, but not enough to criminally convict people because it leaves out the burden of proof is really high. Obviously, Elena Xenophontis wrote an amazing post about this last
Hmm.
night. It was so good. And it's kind of like a sick flex of power whereby they can be like, this is what's been happening. This is what
Hmm.
we've done. You can see it, but you can't get us. You can't get
Yeah.
us. And releasing it is almost kind of like we've worked so hard over the decades to dismantle people power and the
Yeah.
systems that unite people so that the people are ultimately the most powerful people in society. And we're
Yeah.
so confident we have consolidated that power that we're actually kind of going to start doing things in front of you now. And we're
Yeah.
going to release this, but not enough to empower you. And what really I think is tragic is that people are in a state of paralysis now with the overwhelm, and
Yeah.
that they're still waiting on the system to punish itself.
Yeah.
And if anything we need to understand about this system is that it is the system that we
Yeah.
are all bowing down to.
Yeah.
These are the
Yeah.
people we pay mortgages to. These are the people who write the laws that we abide by, fair or unfair.
Yeah.
These are the people who send our children to war. These are the people who steal and extract wealth from countries under like the false stories that manufacture consent for war. And like
Yeah.
going back to my original question here, which I think is important, how can we tie these people to political events and
Yeah.
massive economic deals?
Yeah.
And maybe we could choose one for Cohn and then move on to Epstein so that it gives people a tangible example of how it actually operates.
Yeah. So there's a few very good examples of this, but maybe first, so just in terms of these people being put in power. So even with Reagan, for example, this comes out of this same 50s network through a man called Wasserman, who was actually basically the head of the Music Corporation of America. He's credited with basically creating Reagan's acting career, getting him promoted to the leader of the Actors Guild, and ultimately then getting him elected with major help from Cohn, who was having daily calls with basically Reagan's team, specifically this person called Casey. So Cohn was deeply involved in getting Reagan elected.
Elected.
What
Mhm.
happens during the Reagan years? So, firstly, if we just want to look at a big sort of rupture in human history, was the shift to neoliberalism.
Neoliberalism.
And this
Mhm.
period, the two people most synonymous with this period are Reagan and Thatcher.
Yeah.
And both of them have links to this network. So basically, when it comes to Reagan getting elected, what also happens in this period is he begins a very close relationship with Rupert Murdoch. And the purpose of Fox News Corporation, set up during the Reagan presidency, was to be a voice for Reaganism in mainstream media, essentially neoliberalism.
Yes.
So this is like again part of the birth of really what becomes this Murdoch empire, which has a stranglehold really on the media as a whole. So this
Yeah.
is kind of one element of this. So in the 1980s, you see a really clear example of a few different strands of this story all coming together. So, very famously in the 80s, you had the Iran Contra
Mhm.
scandal.
Contra standing for
Um,
counter-revolutionary, isn't it?
Contra, exactly. They were
Yeah.
counter-revolutionaries against popular movements in Central America, specifically Nicaragua in this
Mhm.
case. So you had a leftist leadership in the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. And you had the US who were directly funding the Contras. However, this was illegal and they had to open up essentially a back channel to support the Contras in Central America who were responsible for really some of the most horrific crimes. And what was this back channel is basically they were through Israel selling weapons to the Iranians. The
Mhm.
Iranians at this point, it was post-Islamic Revolution, were under an arms embargo from the United States, but the Iranians had US hostages at this period that
Mhm.
they wanted to free. So
Mhm.
through the Israelis, they basically transfer weapons to Iran, hostages are released, the money
Mhm.
from the weapons goes to Nicaragua to fund the Contras.
Yeah, so if you think of it as a secret tunnel system where they hide what they're doing behind the scenes, so they're
Yeah.
funneling this through Israel and making money from their enemies to suppress their enemies elsewhere.
Yeah, and Epstein was directly involved within Iran-Contra, and very clearly too, Reagan and this Saudi billionaire who was at times the world's richest man, someone called Khashoggi,
Mhm.
who was like caught red-handed in the Iran-Contra scandal. He was an arms dealer who Epstein was working directly with. And Epstein was working with him, it seems, from when Epstein left Bear Stearns in 1981 under sort of confusing and somewhat controversial circumstances to go off on his own. It's assumed that this Saudi billionaire was likely Epstein's first major client and was assisting him throughout the early 80s, sort of earning his stripes potentially in terms of working his way into the center of this network before he gets picked up by Wexner in around 1985.
Right.
Yeah, so within this, then, so in terms of this general neoliberal strategy and ideology, so, what was sort of the birthplace of neoliberalism in many ways was the first testing ground was really in Chile,
Mm.
when the US overthrew the democratically elected Allende government and replaced him with Pinochet,
Dictatorship, yeah.
who was
Mhm.
a brutal dictator. And also, what happened in this period in Chile was massive scandals around pedophilia, sex rings, etc., and a huge amount of Chileans being trafficked to the United States as part of this network, even in the 70s.
Yeah, I think now is a good time just to restate how the origin of these networks, a key goal is to suppress any type of people's movement
Hmm.
where systems such as socialism, where equality is the nature of the system rather than the competitive extreme consolidation of wealth at the top amongst a tiny few. So you've got
Hmm.
to see these things at play, and Cohn at the heart of this, and the anti-communist, the Jewish Anti-Communist League. We've got
Hmm.
to put all this together as the sole purpose, really, or the most important purpose of this network. So we see them using Chile as a testing ground after they have squashed um, Allende. I can't say that. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
speak Spanish, but um, after and okay, and
Yeah.
you see the origins of the um pedoph human trafficking and
Yeah.
pedophilia. Okay.
Yeah, and so these had direct links also with the CIA. And basically, then, as this sort of relationship scales up and this network becomes more sophisticated, you see then in the 90s, um, an extremely influential document, and it's called Operation Clean Break.
Yes,
And
this is huge. Okay.
this was written, the lead author of this document, so this was written for Netanyahu when he was elected Prime Minister of Israel in 1996. So strangely, this was written by Americans. Um,
For Netanyahu.
for Netanyahu. And
Hmm.
it's actually, if you look at it, it's not even an Israeli policy document. It's a joint US Israeli strategy, and it's born really from what's called this neoconservative, neocon movement in the 90s. The lead author is somebody called Richard Pearl.
Okay.
And
And tell
Richard
me now how
Pearl,
he connects to the heart of the Epstein files.
well, he's got a few arrows pointing in and out of his name on this board as well, I tell you. But he had been caught essentially leaking intelligence to the Israelis in the 70s. Yes, because
Leaking classified US um, intelligence to Israel in the 70s, and he was caught.
caught on wiretap and
Yeah.
basically with Richard Pearl. So he goes on to write this document for Netanyahu. It's called Operation Clean Break.
20 years after getting caught
Strategy
stealing
about,
US
uh,
intelligence. 20 years after getting caught stealing US intelligence. Okay. Yeah. He
yeah.
authors this document for Netanyahu, Operation Clean Break. And what does that lay out? What kind of a plan does that lay out?
So Operation Clean Break, and by the way, so he'd been like deeply embedded ever since in the US so-called Defense Administration, was a key member of Reagan's administration, George Bush as well. So this strategy is basically a shift in US and Israeli strategy in the Arab-Iranian region, let's say. And what was this about is firstly breaking with the Oslo Accords. So
Mhm.
1995, when this was being written, very significantly, the Israeli president signer of the Oslo Accords was assassinated, likely by Netanyahu's henchmen.
Yes. Yitzhak Rabin. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, this strategy was about moving away from the Oslo Accords. So, literally written at the same time they were signed, you know? So, it goes to show they never had any intention of actually sticking with the agreement that they made.
No.
And when people kind of talk about two state and Oslo agreement, like this was dead
It
in,
was dead in the
in the
water. I
water
always
before it existed.
remember it was the name of the guy. I think it was Shlomo Ben-Ami, and he was a key part of the negotiations in the Oslo Accords. And he is on camera saying, if I were a Palestinian, I would never have accepted it. Like
Yeah.
it was destined for failure.
Yeah. Yeah. Even if they had stuck with the deal, it was destined for failure. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
piece by Edward Said called The Morning After, I think it's called, that gives a great analysis of it. But basically, with this, it was sort of beyond the sort of injustice of the deal itself, but it was actually a complete abandonment of the deal. And the main strategy was to move away. So there had been a sort of strategy of like land for peace that Israel and its neighbors were engaged in, where typically there would be negotiations made around like land, for example, like the Sinai desert with Egypt, for example, with the Good
Mhm.
Friday, or sorry, with the Oslo Accords and other deals, for example, with neighboring countries, and they wanted to replace this with front foot aggression. Um, Regime change operations in neighboring countries, and with heavy US involvement in doing so. And the first target on this list is Saddam Hussein and Iraq. But actually, if you look at this strategy, it explains pretty much what's happened since 1996, because the strategy was for the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, of Assad in Syria, Gaddafi in Libya. In it, they're also mentioning Lebanon, and really the last remaining country on this list is Iran.
Iran
Yeah.
is Iran. And sorry, just the author of this, Operation Clean Break Pearl, how does he connect to the Epstein files? Who's his is it's
So, again, in different ways that like are hard to even summarize properly. So the first of which is he's Israeli intelligence as far back as the 70s. But when
Mhm.
it comes to sort of some of these links, when you look into them a bit more, particularly in more recent times, well, firstly, these people, the authors of Clean Break, end up as the architects of the Iraq War in the George Bush government. So they
Yes.
get planted into the George Bush administration. 9/11 happens again under extremely suspicious circumstances that we really need to question more than we ever have.
Mhm.
Netanyahu was warning about this World Trade Center attack in the
And the
90s.
disturbing art piece that was hung in Epstein's house is, to me, like just viscerally makes me want to puke. And
Yeah.
it is this massive art piece of art showing George Bush with a paper plane and Jenga towers falling around him, as though it's all a fucking joke.
Yeah, they found that in Epstein's home in 2019 when they raided it alongside a big picture of Bill Clinton in a dress.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and so these people who wrote the clean break strategy to invade Iraq are conveniently in the top positions of power in George Bush's administration when 9/11 happens and
Hmm.
are the architects then of this Iraq war.
Yeah.
Interestingly, then, so with Richard Pearl, just to follow this thread a bit further, so there was also in the wake of 9/11, they used this to push through a huge amount of very undemocratic programs that were completely abusive of the rights of US citizens, but people around the world in terms of privacy. And
And
the main program,
yeah, here's where we're going to connect it to surveillance as an industry and right up to today, the worst offenders. Okay.
yeah, so basically, there was this total information awareness program. Again, you can look this up on Wikipedia. And this was essentially a, a very invasive and comprehensive intelligence program collecting information on citizens. And not only was it kind of designed for intelligence collecting, but what was Operation Clean Break and what was the point of this total information awareness is this idea of trying to preempt. Yeah. So
Hmm.
preempting attacks on Israel by essentially regime changing your neighbor.
Hmm.
Preempting terrorist attacks by collecting data, trying to run predictive analytics, identify people who someday could become terrorists, as
Like what we see
they like to
today
say.
in the AI that has been used in the genocide of Palestine.
Yeah,
Like, you
and
know,
then target them in this way. So
this
Pearl,
originated in this document, Operation Clean Break, and the Total Information Awareness Policy,
yeah,
which stamped on people's basic rights and
mhm,
gave, I suppose, a spook story that it was necessary. We all remember Fox News in those times, like with the color-coded threats to the
yeah,
US of a terrorist attack, and people were, they were deliberately scared out of their skins. So there was a lot of, I suppose, submissive behavior from the public in general,
yeah,
because of these narratives that were spun about imminent threats to their safety. And so this total information awareness, what it did was it gave a legitimate veneer to this criminal espionage. And then once it had done and collected the raw data, it transferred that data to a private company called,
Palantir, more or
there
less.
we go. So
And
we can
not
connect.
necessarily in terms of direct transfer in this way, but yes, a lot of the infrastructure, the data, the strategy would ultimately go on to become Palantir. And Palantir, because total information awareness, if the government is doing it, just like with Iran Contra, it's illegal. Or just
Yeah.
like the role of Rupert Murdoch is illegal for the government to do. And this is part of the strategy of privatization as well. It's essentially trying to wash your hands of the government's crimes through private enterprise, and if that's not possible, through outright criminal networks.
Yeah.
And it's
And
important
Peter
just with
Thiel
Palantir
and
as well.
Palantir. are connected to the heart of the Epstein Files as well. And a lot of people might have heard that recorded conversation between Epstein and Ehud. Oh, what's his name?
Barak.
Barak, yeah, the Israeli Prime Minister, where Epstein is educating him on who Peter Thiel is.
Yeah. So with Palantir then, so the timing is also very significant with Palantir and also the funding. Because what happens, the Total Information Awareness Program has to shut down due to illegal surveillance activities that can't be done by government.
Mhm.
So what happens in this same period is Palantir emerges from Thiel and Karp, and these are some of these PayPal billionaires alongside Elon Musk.
Yes.
So they have designed basically a security software system within PayPal that they think can be used for cyber surveillance and ultimately militarization. So when this shift is happening, there's a guy called Wade. I think his name is Alan Wade. He is basically the head of the CIA, CIO, it's called, and making decisions for a wing of the CIA called QTEL. And
And
this is,
so this blew my mind.
mm,
QTEL is the venture capitalist arm of the CIA. So the CIA invests
yeah,
in private tech. I mean, even just that concept blew my mind that it
yeah.
exists.
And this is how Palantir was created. They were
So
Palantir.
QTEL is a
Yeah,
name that people need to know.
yeah. So
QTEL,
they
a
were
fucking finance
Palantir's
wing of
funders.
CIA.
Yeah, yeah. So Palantir was created like they were their original funding was the CIA. So there's never been a separation. And this guy Wade, who was making the decisions to invest in Palantir, what had he been doing, and what did he ultimately go into when he leaves the CIA in 2005? Is joins a very similar company to Palantir, and it's called Chiliad. And who was the co-founder of Chiliad is
The
somebody called
Maxwells.
Christine Maxwell, who's Ghislaine Maxwell's sister, and another daughter of Robert Maxwell, who's confirmed Israeli agent.
My God. Dara, I think this is a good place to end part one.
Yeah.
Because this has been a phenomenal journey
Mm,
from Prohibition up to the beginnings of Palantir.
yeah. And there's a lot
And
more even within all of
and
this
there's lots more to
that we
come.
can go into. But just in terms of Maxwell, just to make it clear, because I'm not sure if we mentioned, and if people want to go and do their own research on this, Robert Maxwell. He was a confirmed Israeli agent,
Yeah.
Mossad, the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, who was Epstein's partner in crime, and
Mhm.
he has extremely close links to Mossad, CIA, and also MI6 at the same
MI6. Yeah, he was
time.
in the House of Lords and he was the former owner of the Mirror. They love to own the press, the narrative, the story. He was also the owner of Folan's, and it was or Macmillan's, I can't remember, but they're basically school textbooks that program children's minds from, the very first days. So he was a kind of a supervillain, you would call
Yeah,
him. And he was based in the UK, and obviously Ghislaine came from him and connected to another arm of this sordid network. And here's where we start to see the phenomenal reach and scale of it. On one hand, we're just astounded by the breadth of it, but it's ultimately about this tiny concentration of consolidated wealth at the top. So
yeah,
I think in part two, we'll take it from here, from Palantir and into the present day and into what we're seeing happening in the world now.
yeah. These recent
Everything.
releases of these Epstein files we didn't really even speak about in this, but
Mm.
there's many links in terms of what was released, what we can look back on, and just to basically give credit to this woman, Whitney Webb, who actually has done the most amazing research on this. However, it was before a huge amount of these files were actually released. She has a four-part series on Mint Press that I recommend people to read. And
Okay.
what did I also come across that we didn't get to talk about today
But we will talk
is
about in part
is
two.
this network and their existence in Ireland, the links to
Oh, yeah,
Mountbatten and Prince Andrew, Robert Maxwell, and it goes all the way back to this guy, Roy Cohn, who was
this guy
involved
Roy
in trafficking boys out of Ireland, specifically through Kincora
Kincora.
in Belfast. And I think that's also worth exploring. And what does that also mean? We need to start asking serious questions about the mother and baby homes in Ireland, about the
Yes.
4,000 children who were essentially confiscated from their mothers and sent abroad. Many of these mother and baby homes were sending hundreds of children to the United States. And given what we know now, what was happening in Chile under Pinochet, and basically what they use these sort of peripheral regions that they control for, and how they connect to this network, I think is something we should also explore in part two.
Yeah, Dara, and I think that that's a really important one for Irish people because I think it's chilling, and I think it's going to have a big impact on all of us unraveling this together. But I think there's a huge amount of liberation in it, and we need to kind of get serious about bridging these manufactured divides among the working class in Ireland along the lines of identity politics between the left and the right. And we've got to understand that it's a top and bottom fight here.
Yeah,
And the architects of that division, like Steve Bannon, are right at the heart of the Epstein Files as well. It's always connects back to the Epstein Files wherever you see abuses of power and the kind of stamping out of people power. You can be
yeah,
sure that its origins are here, and that's what we're learning.
yeah,
Um, and the worst parts of our history connect here as well. Um,
yeah.
so I'm really grateful to all the research you've done here, Dara, because I think one of the most revolutionary things we can do right now is to refuse confusion and to be very clear and to look at this and analyze it through, I suppose, a systematic lens
Yeah.
and to see what is common. Like you started at the beginning and you said, well, what is common to all of this? And you said capitalism,
Hmm.
um, Zionism,
Hmm.
and criminality.
Yeah.
And
From the start, from the very
yes,
start, and even the sort of axis of this from the US to Israel, how were these countries even formed in the first place?
absolutely.
No?
And then it's the foundation of the system we're living in that is kind of becoming undone at the seams. And
Hmm.
instead of having, I suppose, a helpless, confused mindset, it's actually important that we kind of gather ourselves a little bit
Hmm.
and refuse to be confused because ultimately it is simple. It's depraved and it's horrifying, but it is simple.
Yeah.
Um, so we'll
Yeah.
leave it there for this part and we'll pick it up in part two. And thank you so much, Dara.
Thank you. Chat soon.